Hello and welcome to another edition of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. My name is Neil Parekh. I am the executive producer and guest host of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along, and I will be hosting today's show. Our guest is Tina Kelley. Tina is an author, poet, and former Metro reporter for the New York Times. She's the co-author of Breaking Barriers, How P-Tech Schools Create a Pathway from High School to College to Career. She also wrote a book about teen homelessness, Almost Home, and has a book of poetry as well. So we'll talk to her about all of that. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And a big shout out to everyone watching on replay who are catching this show. Thank you. We are also live on Tina's Facebook page and her Twitter account. So thank you everyone for joining us. As I mentioned, my name is Neil Parekh. If you're watching on Facebook or Twitter, please make sure to click play on the video itself so that if you leave a comment, we would be able to see it and show it on the air. We have a few folks have already checked in. Our friend Doug Levy is watching from the West Coast, 5:30 a.m. local time. Thank you, Doug. Always great to have you join us. Patricia Freudenberg is watching on LinkedIn, and she's noting a black screen. So hopefully that's something, maybe if you refresh your screen, hopefully we are coming to you live, and we'll try and check that while we're watching just to make sure everything is good. It does look good on our end, so maybe just refresh your screen if you can, Patricia. My mom is watching from Hastings-on-Hudson. Hi, Mom. Great to see you every week. Thank you. This counts, right? This counts as our weekly phone call, kind of, maybe. I just want to point out that I'm wearing my Yankee shirt today because my mom shared some pictures of me when I was like 1 year old wearing a Mets shirt. And I was very upset about that. So I want to make sure that you know, Mom, and that everyone knows I've always been a Yankee fan, regardless of what some people may have put on me when I was unable to choose. But thank you, Mom. Carla Baranauckas is joining us from soggy Weehawken, New Jersey. Carla is one of our producers and, in fact, was instrumental in putting us in touch with Tina. I know that Hurricane Henry is hitting the Northeast. There's already flooding in New Jersey, and it looks like overnight it moved a little bit to the east. It looks like more of a direct hit on Rhode Island. So I want to just make sure that everyone stays safe if you're in the hurricane's path. There'll be flooding, etc., in Long Island and Connecticut as well. I went to school in Connecticut. My wife's family is from there. I have family in Long Island. So we're definitely thinking about everyone in the path. Our friend Miriam Berkeley is watching from Hell's Kitchen in New York City, hoping there won't be too much flooding down there as well. Our producer Paula Kiger is watching from Tallahassee, Florida. Paula is no stranger to hurricanes. Several have come up the Panhandle even recently. So Paula, you know what folks are dealing with. Paula is watching on Facebook, primarily on Sri's Facebook page. She will be sharing links to articles we're talking about, links to Tina's books, etc. So thank you, Paula, for providing that context, that added value for our viewers and people watching later. Our friend Jonathan Borstein is watching from a wet East Village. Stay dry, Jonathan. Naomi is watching from offering a warm good morning from the humid Upper West Side. So we're getting a lot of weather reports, which is really, really great. Let us know where you're watching from. Let us know what the weather is like in your area. Michael Finelli is watching. Good morning, Michael. Thank you very much. And I know Tina will definitely give you a shout out. Michael is involved in one of the P-Tech schools that Tina will be talking about later, I believe in New Brunswick. So thank you, Michael, and thank you for sharing this. Please make sure to share on Facebook and tag friends and colleagues who you think might be interested in watching. And Michael says he's looking forward to hearing Tina's story. As a reminder for folks, again, our guest is Tina Kelley. She is the co-author with Stanley Litow of Breaking Barriers, How P-Tech Schools Create a Pathway from High School to College to Career. So we're looking forward to hearing all about that in just a few minutes. What I'd like to do first is give a little bit of a sense of what's in the paper, scroll through, look at the various sections, and then we will bring on Tina as our guest. So we will just add that real quick. There we go. So there's the New York Times cam. We have the front page section, and we have, of course, the focus is on Afghans trying to leave outside Kabul airport. What an incredible story that is. In the lead, Afghans describe terror as hopes of escape and fade. Miscue after miscue, exit plan unravels. Two-year-old child is crushed at airport gate. Just heartbreaking. Before Cuomo, strike brewed at Time's Up. Time's Up was an organization that was started by power players in Hollywood, women who wanted to use their collective power to support other women dealing with sexual harassment, et cetera, who didn't have that same access to resources, money, et cetera. But if you read the article, their ties to Cuomo, their ties to others have muddled their mission, and it's certainly disappointing. As Delta rises, nurse shortfall imperils patients. Certainly, with coronavirus is not over. We're seeing the rise in cases. We're seeing, particularly in areas that don't have high vaccination rates, but we're seeing a lot of breakthrough cases as well. So I think that people are generally going back to a more conservative approach, being a little bit more careful. We'll certainly ask Tina about her experience over the past year and a half and what it was like to put out a book in this time. There's an article linked to drug trade in Haiti assassination inquiry, and a new wave of refugees face a much chillier U.S. welcome. These are the Afghan refugees that we're expecting. So if you take a look at the rest of the paper real quick, the Sunday Review has a piece, Our Saigon. So certainly what we owe the victims of America's failed war in Afghanistan by Viet Thanh Nguyen. And that's a really stark image, the shadow of a plane leaving. Sunday Styles, a Georgia county faces the gravity of a new space race. What goes up might come down nearby. What's interesting is a lot of these single photo section fronts. A really interesting design. The Sunday Business, ready for sentient Disney robots. Nostalgia won't cut it with today's children who are looking for new experiences of their own. So a good dominant photo, but then a few teasers at the bottom as well. We have another dominant photo for Arts and Leisure. Small space, big vision. Turning his closet into a stage for streaming, Joshua William Geld became one of the pandemic year's most impressive impresarios. I would say that Sri could challenge him for that title, going 250 straight days with the COVID show and everything else he's done through Digimentors. We'll talk about Digimentors in a little bit. The magazine, the cover story is about his death helped awaken the nation to a rise in anti-Asian violence. For his grieving family, the reckoning hasn't gone far enough. The book review, the cover is Under the Sea, Below the Edge of Darkness, a memoir of exploring light and life in the deep sea, and The Brilliant Abyss, exploring the majestic hidden life of the deep ocean. And there's also a T magazine, Women's Fashion, this issue. So what I'd like to do before we bring on Tina. I want to give a quick shout out to our production team. We would not be able to put on this show without the support of Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranauckas. They put in a lot of effort to make this show a success. Thank you very much for all the work that you do. We also want to thank our sponsor, MuckRack. MuckRack has and Sri have a great relationship. Sri put on a course for them, and they've supported the New York Times read along. So thank you, MuckRack, for all of your support. If you're interested in being a sponsor, please contact Sri at Digimentors.group, or myself, Neil, at Digimentors.group, and we'd love to talk to you about that. I also want to take a moment to talk about Digimentors. Digimentors is the consulting firm that Sri started a few years ago, and of course, last year with the pandemic, we shifted our focus to live stream and virtual events. We do, in addition to conferences and webinars, we also do social and digital consulting. We produce this show. We help produce She's on Call, which comes on at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And so if you're interested in having us work on a show for you, please get in touch. You can email Sri, again, at Sri@Digimentors.group, or myself, Neil at Digimentors.group. And we'd love to work with you on our show, particularly as things are going back to a virtual environment. On a personal note, I just finished a full year working full time with Digimentors. My first official day was August 17th of last year, and it's been an incredible ride. So thank you all for your support, the great clients we've had a chance to work with, great colleagues on our team, and I wouldn't have traded it for the world. So thank you very much. With that, I want to bring on our guest, Tina Kelley, and talk to her about her books, her poetry, and then we'll also look at the newspaper with her in a little bit. So Tina, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
What I wanted to ask you is, first of all, as we ask all of our guests, talk to us about what this last year and a half has been like for you with COVID. From when we shut down, how have you managed? And and then when we talk about that personal side for a moment, then I'll ask you about how you managed to publish a book in that same time.
Thanks. We've been feeling very lucky in that our families made it through. My mother-in-law actually is just now coming out of quarantine from getting COVID as a vaccinated person, and which was scary. But in general, there's been a lot of worry. There's been a lot of pulling together as a community, which I'll probably talk about later in our town. And it feels like we saw the end of the tunnel and now we're back in the middle of the tunnel. So I'm sending out gratitude to all the frontline workers and lots of hope for things getting back more under control here and particularly the rest of the world.
Absolutely. And we certainly want to give a shout out to all of the frontline workers. There was that front page article about the nursing shortage, which is making things harder. And certainly, even with nursing homes, it's challenging. So this is certainly, it's just been an incredible time. And now, as we're looking at back to school, for some folks, school started earlier in August, which I still have a problem with. Growing up in New York, we always started after Labor Day, so that's really when you should start.
Right.
My daughter is starting school in person tomorrow. In fact, here in Fairfax County, everyone is fully masked, thankfully, but I'm still a little worried about what that will mean. For folks who are watching, I definitely encourage you to stay online for the 11 o'clock She's on Call show hosted by Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar and Dr. Marina Kurian. They will be focusing on back to school year 2 with Dr. Michelle Fiscus and Dr. Linda Mendonça. And I apologize for mispronouncing the name. Michelle is the District 4 chair-elect for, it looks like, pediatrics. And Linda is the president of the National Association of School Nurses. So they'll certainly have some interesting perspectives to offer. And I encourage you to watch She's on Call at 11 Eastern Time. So we mentioned your book real quickly, Tina. Your book, again, is Breaking Barriers, How P-TECH Schools Create a Pathway from High School to College to Career. There's some great blurbs from Arne Duncan, the former United States Secretary of Education. Breaking Barriers is a compelling read. It shows that a clear pathway from school to college to career goes beyond an aspiration. It's achievable and for all students. The global success of P-TECH schools is something education, government, and business leaders need to learn about and get behind. And from Darren Walker, president of the Ford Foundation, Breaking Barriers is a must-read. The P-TECH story shows that quality schools leading to not just a high school diploma, but college completion and career success are critical to our future. This is the kind of opportunity and support that must be provided to all students, regardless of income or race. And I think that's a very important point, regardless of income or race. So with that lead in, Tina, what are P-TECH schools for those who are not familiar?
P-TECH is a collaboration among a public high school, a community college, and a corporation or business or group of businesses. And it results in a free associate's degree for the students. It's a 6-year program, and the business and community college work together with the high school to make sure that the curriculum flows very smoothly from the summer before 9th grade to a job at the corporation. They get a free associate's degree. They are first in line to be interviewed for a job at the business. And it is a very equitable model because there's no entry exam. Students are able to get in by lottery and by interest. They don't have to pass any barriers that might reject them based on prior academic experience. And we've seen young people who came in doing very poorly in middle school go on to be the valedictorian at a P-TECH school and get a full scholarship, say, to Cornell. There's one person involved in the book who was in that exact situation. So it's transformative. It's free to the public high school, and it addresses the skills gap at the need of corporations and businesses that need those new collar skills. Lots of jobs are wanting right now, going without people to fill them, especially in technology, which has been historically very undiverse. And P-TECH schools have been able to send highly qualified and diverse job candidates to the businesses that need them.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And we had a colleague of yours, someone who was watching earlier, Michael Finelli. As you know, tell us who Michael Finelli is.
Michael Finelli is the principal of the New Brunswick P-TECH, which is now in its second year. Correct me if I'm wrong. All the years blur together, but they had 40 kids starting off. That was their first day of school. They had a visitor in Phil Murphy, which was a bit of a surprise. I was there, and he spoke about how when he talks to corporations who are interested in relocating to New Jersey, he will be talking about P-TECH schools as part of the pipeline that brings highly qualified candidates to the laps of corporations. It's actually homegrown talent for some of the businesses that are working with P-TECH. They get to make sure that the young people have all the skills, including the soft skills, that they're looking for in their new employees. And some of the young people, particularly in the Brooklyn school, which was the flagship school, are able to go on to careers that are paying like $85,000 for a 21-year-old fresh out of the program. It's quite amazing and transformative.
That's great. I want to catch up with a few of the comments, a few of the people who are watching. The first one I want to give a shout out to, Real Sri. So Sri, I'm fake Sri, I guess, in that construction. Sri is watching on the Facebook page, and he's looking forward to hearing more about P-Tech schools. Thank you for the shout out, Sri, to me and to the rest of our production team. Always great to have you joining when you can't host. I will say, as a side note, I've been working with Sri for about 3 years. We're approaching our 6th year with the read along, and so I'm probably up at 3.5 now or something. But I still remember the first time he asked me to guest host the show. This is back when we were on Facebook. He gave me the credentials for his Facebook account and said, "Neil, go live on my account. Make sure the show keeps going that Sunday," since he was traveling or something. And I always think of it as a huge honor and a privilege to take this role. And again, thank you, Sri, for that. And thank you for everyone who's part of the Read Along community that joins us on a regular basis. We have Stefan Kaplan joining us from Ramsey, New Jersey, and it's dry still there, so that's great, Stefan. Ralph Blumenthal, former New York Times reporter, former guest on the show. Tina, you know Ralph, I take it?
Hi. Yes.
Yeah, Ralph was great, and thank you for watching, Ralph. Nikhil is watching from Greenwich, Connecticut. So far, just a rainy Sunday morning, so we're thankful. And again, we're paying attention to the path of the storm. Ralph is watching from Manhattan. Our friend Diane Stefani is watching from a partly sunny Margate, New Jersey. Ted Coltman is watching from Washington, D.C. on YouTube, just close to where I'm at. I'm based in Springfield, Virginia. Ellen Austin is watching. There's a storm over New York. Mary Jane Conlon Riley is watching on a soggy Long Island. If any of these folks are folks you know, please, Tina, make sure to give them a shout out. They'll be watching on your page as well. Ron Thomas is watching from Dubai. Thank you, Ron, another former guest on the show. And Pradnya Haldapur watching from Silver Spring, Maryland. And let's see who else. Maryland Zayfert watching from Staten Island, Maryland. Thank you. Someone watching from Twitter, Superintendent Johnson, AUB Johnson. Tina, please tell us about Superintendent Johnson.
Dr. Johnson and Mr. Finelli were so central to the best part of the reporting in this book, which was the live part where I actually got to be in the room where it happens. They were incredibly generous in giving me, access to the students, to the teachers, to the scary first year. Actually, they're starting their 3rd year now that I think about it, because the first year they said they were building the airplane while flying it. The second year during the pandemic, they said they were using the parachute while sewing it. So I don't know what they're going to be doing this year, but I hope it doesn't get more dire in the metaphor department. But they were very... At
United Way, we often use the metaphor building a plane while flying it, which is certainly a little scary.
But they were very generous.
It's so great to have... Sorry,
they were very generous in letting me in to be able to watch as it happened, because it was it's a grand experiment, and each new P-Tech school is different. Each has its own joys and challenges, and to let a reporter in for that is not for the faint of heart.
Well, and Pradnya asked, she's again from Silver Spring, Maryland, how many schools are there in this program? How many schools are considered P-Tech schools? I know there are schools in Newburgh, New York, Newburgh Free Academy, in Dallas. I know IBM did a great program, I think. There's also P-Tech Australia, right? How
Yes.
broad is this network?
There are 220 P-Tech schools serving, at this point, 100,000 students. They're in, I think, 12 states and 6 countries, possibly more by now. And one of the joys of it is, at first people thought, oh, why are you sending kids just to 2-year colleges? It felt like, to some critics, that it was warehousing them into a less than program. 80% of the graduates go on to 4-year colleges. So it really lights a fire under the students, and it inspires them in their learning. It's very practically related. They learn all sorts of practical skills. And when you mentioned IBM, it was my co-author, Stan Litow, who was at the time the president of the IBM Foundation, who was central in getting the model off the ground and coming up with the idea.
And I just want to get back to that one stat. You mentioned 80%
Mm-hmm.
of the graduates go on to, was that 4-year?
Yeah, yeah.
That's incredible.
Isn't it?
And what about the reference to income and race? How do those numbers fare when you look at the data, um, when you break it down? Because that's usually a big issue around high school graduation rates, the disparities when you look at Black and Latino, Latinx students, much less lower socioeconomic groups. How does that fare with P-Tech schools?
Well, P-Tech schools, I think all of the graduates who have gone on to jobs at the New York school, at the Brooklyn school, which is the flagship school, celebrating its 10th anniversary next month, are students of color. And most of them, or a high percentage of them, are lower socioeconomic status. And across New York State, where there are 16 P-Tech schools that were created in the second wave of new schools, they were the request for proposals was directed to schools that had a high percentage of students of color and students of lower socioeconomic status. So it is basically directed towards them in every one of the models, in order to address some of the inequities that have gone on in education, in higher education, and in tech.
That's great. And I think Michael was offering a few more data points. Let's see what Michael was sharing with us. That they're in year 3
Yes.
of the program there. So that's in New Brunswick. And you said Brooklyn is the flagship. That was they're in year 10 already, which is great. Flying the plane as we planned, which is another way of putting it. And then he shared in Facebook, and maybe Paula can grab that link and share across our other channels the full list of P-Tech locations worldwide, which is great. So thank you.
Thank you.
Rose did a little fact checking. 220 schools serving 100 students. And I think this is just a quote, 80% going on to 4-year colleges. Yes, absolutely amazing.
And keep in mind in this that it's open to students who are in special education as well as English language learners. So
English language learners as well. That is good. That's an important piece. So thank you for sharing that. Let's take a look. This is we can pull up the webpage right here and show exactly what that map looks like. So we'll just scroll down just a little bit. There we go. This is what the worldwide P-Tech schools map looks like. The US, Canada, Mexico, primarily in the US. I mean, it looks like there are several countries. I'm going to guess about 24, 20 countries, I think you said. But what are some of the larger countries outside the US?
Let's see, Russia, Australia, New Zealand, France. Oh, there you go.
There's a list. But which of the countries have the largest number of schools, do you think?
I think it would be France and Australia. They had some of the larger cohorts. Some of them have one school that they're starting now and are hoping to take off. I know that in France, the former CEO of IBM, Ginny Rometty, had worked with the head Macron there, and they were trying to get one, I think, in each province. And I think if you click on the US, you'll get the state distribution on that website. That's the IBM sponsored website.
Yeah, it's not working,
Yeah.
not coming up
Oh, well.
for some reason. Not on that. I think there's another. No, this was the under schools, so we'd have to look
Okay.
for that, unfortunately.
Okay.
But I am interested in noting that there's also a school in Egypt. I lived in Egypt for 2 years, so that's
Yes.
really interesting to note. So thank you. And Deborah Bernick, who's usually here in Northern Virginia, is actually in LA, so she's logging in early this morning. And Carla is letting us know that this year's Brooklyn P-Tech valedictorian, Nathan, got his associate's degree 2 weeks before he got his high school diploma. I think that shows the power of this program, right? That you can really, make that path work.
And it shows the flexibility of the community colleges involved. The Brooklyn School worked with, or still works with, City Tech, which is part of the CUNY system. And I remember in my research finding out that there was a problem getting folks to graduate from community college if they did not have their high school diplomas. In some cases, in other schools, there have been problems with young people entering community college without their high school diplomas. So they had conversations, they worked it out, they switched around their bureaucratic structures, and the community colleges get a great deal out of the P-Tech model. No P-Tech student has required remedial classes at this point, and nationally, 43% of college students require remedial classes. So the students are very prepared for their classes, even though they might be 15 or 16 and sitting in classrooms with 20-year-olds. And they also have a very high graduation rate.
And as a reminder for folks, we're talking with Tina Kelley about breaking barriers, how P-Tech schools create a pathway from high school to college to career. And it's an incredible story that she's sharing. Our colleague, Marilyn Zafert, was just talking about how she spent the summer putting 4,500 youth to work in Staten Island. These programs are so important, and she follows up by saying this is so wonderful. So thank you so much for bringing the P-Tech story to our audience and sharing with them. Tell us a little bit about publishing the book in a pandemic. Writing first of all, and then publishing it, and the book tour that really isn't a book tour. What has that been like?
Building the plane while flying it. It's for me, it wasn't all that different. I had worked at home probably since 2004, as even when I was at the Times, I was working from home a lot. And the heartbreak was not being able to go to some of the schools that are close to New York, but not not open at the time. So the face-to-face reporting, I missed out on a great deal, but there was a lot of Zoom reporting. We just had a really quick deadline and made it, because that's what we do. And my colleagues at Teachers College Press, the publisher of the book, can talk about what it's like to sell a book when there's no place to go with it. But we're working very hard on that. We have events planned, and we're not sure if they're going to be virtual or real at this point, but there is an event planned at the New York Public Library. I know Stan is working with Duke and Columbia University and a number of other places where we're going to be talking about the book and getting the word out as widely as possible. We really want this model to take off. We want to reach out to business people who are looking for new qualified employees. We want to reach out to community colleges and high schools that are looking for programs that work. And we also want to get this out to more students. The program also includes, when your guest was talking about, or your commenter was talking about summer jobs, the P-Tech program has paid internships for juniors at the companies that are partners. They have workplace visits. They have mentors from the companies that work directly with the students online, mostly, but especially during the pandemic. And there's so many benefits to everybody involved in being part of the P-Tech model.
That's great. We have a few questions that have come in. For comment, Ron says he does not like working from home and misses his international flights. As I mentioned earlier, he's based in Dubai, works in human resources and in a leadership capacity. But one of the things that was always great, he would always watch our show. We'd never know where he's watching from, right? He might be in Dubai, might be in Southeast Asia on a trip, but he always makes it a point to work it into his schedule. So thank you, Ron, for your support. And again, we hope you and everyone else stays safe, takes the necessary precautions as things are tightening up. Most people watching this show have gotten their vaccinations, believe in masking. We certainly are very strong proponents of science and taking those precautions. But I think at this point, everyone is just hunkering down a little bit more and being a little bit more careful with the breakthrough cases, with Delta, et cetera. A few other questions that have come in. We will start with Patricia asking, who would you say is your most memorable mentor or inspiration for writing this book or Almost Home, which we'll ask you about in a few minutes?
Oh, wow. For this book, I'd have to say Rashid Davis, who's the principal of the original P-Tech. I was able to interview him in person before the shutdown. I was able to watch him in action with his students. He is just a full-throated advocate for his students. He is so fact-based and research-based. He burns the midnight oil so that his students can get what they want. He worries about them. He talks about all that they're up against, and he is the real deal when it comes to school leaders. I think Mr. Finelli would join me in saying that he's an inspiration to the principals all through the P-Tech network and beyond. And I think for the book on homelessness, I'd give a shout out to my mentee, who is a huge inspiration to me on the difficulties that young people face when they have homeless issues. And she was able to get herself through community college. So shout out to Taisha.
And Almost Home is the book that we're referencing. This was your previous book about teen homelessness and how people sharing, I think there were like 6 stories of teens who found their way to Covenant House. Senator Cory Booker, when he was mayor of Newark, said Almost Home is that rare and special book that inspires us to make a difference. And then Alex Kotlowitz, best-selling author of There Are No Children Here, said the moving stories here offer a sense of promise, a belief that with guidance, empathy, and some semblance of home, even the most wounded teens can thrive. What incredible words about the book that you wrote, Almost Home. I think that Ralph's question is really interesting. How do you toggle between nonfiction writing and poetry? And we'll be certainly talking about your poetry in just a moment.
Well, thanks, Ralph. They feed each other. Especially when I was a general assignment reporter at the Times, I used to just be sent places that would end up inspiring me. And I did 20 years in daily journalism, so I was sent off to all sorts to talk to people that I would never have talked to as a regular citizen, to visit Southern Jersey, which was described to me as a place where God lost his shoes, down in the Pine Barrens, when I was writing about a endangered swamp pink, which is a plant down there that was endangered. I would just get poetry tidbits in my daily work. I miss that a lot. I can still do that with reporting for books, but it's slightly less varied. It's more on one particular topic, which is also a good thing. And I think that I think nonfiction. I think poetry has helped me be a better nonfiction writer because I'll get those metaphors in there whenever I can.
That's good. And before we leave Breaking Bad, on a practical note, Miriam Berkeley would like to ask, how can students get involved with P-Tech schools? Is it something that parents can reach out? What would be your advice to her?
If you're lucky enough to live in a district that has a P-Tech school, then you apply. Your ninth grader, your rising ninth grader would apply through the lottery. If you don't, then I suggest you write your governor. The governors are the first line of adopting P-Tech as a model. We like to work through the state governors to get the model adopted. They will issue the request for proposals in most cases. And because education is a state function, the governors from both sides of the aisle have been central in spreading the model.
That's great. A little advocacy never hurt, and it's always important to get involved in the process, talking with your legislators, the governor, even the school boards, I would assume.
Yes.
We talked a little bit about your poetry, and I wanted to ask you about your most recent book of poetry. You've written several previous books, Precise, I guess it's A Bloom and a Rye.
Yes.
And what is it? The Gospel
of Galore. Yes.
Of Galore. But your most recent book is Rise Wildly. And that is, the Martha Solana, author of Gravity Assist and Reckless Lovely. And again, thank you for tagging her in the post on Twitter. In Rise Wildly, Tina Kelley wows us with her infectious wonder of the earthly and the divine. She is the queen of the cool fact, mistress of the miraculous. We learned that there are 100,000 undersea mountains, only 1,000 of them named, and that a baby giggles on average 400 times a day. When you talk about poetry and nonfiction, it seems like you're doing a bit of both. That looks like an easy article in the New York Times, looking at facts and numbers and some good research. It's not. I mean, when I think of poetry, I would picture someone sitting in a field up against a tree, looking at the sky and dreaming and thinking about describing the wonder around them. When I read that description and think of you writing poetry, I picture someone in a research library, looking for facts and interviewing people and figuring out exactly what they want to write. Tell us a little bit about Rise Wildly. And what I'm going to do, we're going to make sure we get to the poem in the magazine. Okay. And at that point, I'll have you read a poem from Rise Wildly. But tell us about the book in general and your poetry in general.
Well, Rise Wildly came out from Cavan Carey Press, which is a wonderful poetry press in New Jersey that treats its poets like a spa treatment and gives them editing and a beautiful cover that's very soft to the touch with this French flap that folds in. And
do you have a copy?
Yeah, I do. Well, I have the A Bloom and a Rye. They have this. The cover has this little flap in it so that you have your built-in bookmark. It's just a really rare treat. Rise Wildly was a collection of maybe, I guess the oldest poem in there is 20 years old, but of mostly more recent work. It doesn't have a particular theme, but it definitely talks about quirky aspects of life. And the title poem has a New York Times related story to it. I'll read it later, but the premise of the title poem came from a Metro brief, and it was headlined "Trains Running After Storms," which is relevant for today. the trains were back up and running after some storms, but I thought, what if the trains actually ran after the storms? And what would that look like with trains flying through the air and chasing tornadoes? So a lot of my poetry process has to do with surfing the internet and reading stuff that I'm interested in, catching tiny little facts that I put in a file that will show up in a poem someday. But Science Times has been a huge inspiration for that. There are lots of little scientific, nature-related facts from Science Times and other sources from all over the internet that that go into that file and get used down the road. So that's my process. If I had to sit down with a piece of paper and a pencil in a field looking at the stars, I would never write a poem again. But if I can look at that file that has all the things that I find inspiring, they tend to glom together and turn into poems.
So that's wonderful to hear, just in terms of where you get your inspiration from. And that leads me to asking you, and this is building on the work that Carla does with a weekly newsletter she puts out called The Local Connection. What would be your tip for writers? What pro tip would you offer, whether it's fiction or nonfiction? What do you tell writers when they come looking for advice?
I tell them to turn off their inner editor. I tell them to write every day. I tell them 96% of everything is crap, and that's Sturgeon's law. There was a scientist named Sturgeon who was looking at varied, I think it was studies in his field, and he just pronounced that 96% of everything was really not worth much. And I found that the most liberating sentence ever, because I could write 100 poems and have 4 great ones. And I could take 20 of those first drafts that were awful, and with the help of my writers group and my editing and rewriting, end up with respectable stuff. So I always tell students that when I talk to classes at college, I sit in on a class at Rutgers in freshman writing, and I tell them, just, you have to do it every day. It's like learning an instrument. That's how you get better, is by doing a lot of it, and it's fine if it's not awesome.
And that was our colleague Rose Horowitz saying, interesting process on writing poems. Thank you for that. I mentioned the Local Connection newsletter. The Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University puts out the Local Connection newsletter each week. Our friend Carla Baranauckas is the editor. Each week it offers story ideas and pro tips for journalists. Best of all, it's free. So I definitely encourage folks to subscribe at bit.ly/local news tips, bit.ly/local news tips. And, you may be featured in an upcoming issue, Tina. So thank you again for sharing that wisdom. Just a few more comments. Ellen says, ain't that the truth? 96% of everything is crap. Not just writing, apparently, 96% of everything.
Yeah.
Which we may have to break down a little bit. Naomi Service shares Anne Lamott's advice for writers. Blocked or not, and I think this works in a family-friendly show, write a shitty first draft. My daughter isn't listening, and go from there. Works for me, also a poet. Naomi, thank you for joining us. Please make sure you stick around for Tina's reading of her poem and for the New York Times Magazine poem this week. Patricia also adds 96% of everything. That's amazing. How do you end up with content with so much limitations? Wow, thanks for sharing Sturgeon's law. I'm not sure if I guess that's maybe how you spell it. I will say that in my own estimation, 96% of everything is crap. Yeah, that might be the case. My approach to it, my experience with that is in telling jokes. So since college, I actually tell hundreds of jokes, right? my percentage is really low of what's funny. It might be 4%. But because I tell so many, I actually tell more funny jokes than the average person, right? The other average person might do 10 jokes and, get, I don't know, 5%, 6% funny ones. If I do, 1,000 jokes, you get 1%. Think of the numbers there. So that's the way I cover it. Carla says Harlan Coben's advice: you can fix bad sentences, you can't fix no sentences.
Yep.
Very true. And that's for any writer, if they're blocked, the advice is just sit down and work. Just put pen to paper, fingers on keyboard, free write, get something out there just to work through the process. And that works not just with writing, but any kind of work. When you just don't want to do it, just find something to do. Just find something easy to get going again. Want to give a special shout out to Amy Parekh Mehta. You might recognize the last name. That's my sister watching from Bellevue, Washington. So what's interesting, I lived in Seattle for 15 years. I moved, and like 2-3 years later, my sister moved to the Seattle area. Tina, you were in Seattle area. How long were you there for?
I was there for 6 happy years.
6.5 years working with the PI and the Times?
Yep. And then eventually with the New York Times, I was helping the bureau chiefs out there. And then I was freelancing, and then I got on contract, and then I came back. So Seattle was actually my ramp to the Gray Lady.
Absolutely. And our friend Rose says she also writes poetry and can sit in a field or library and write. That's a reference to an earlier conversation we had, but I will usually read several poems or some things for inspiration first. And I think that's really a great comment. Yes. Reading, if you're a writer, read more, understand, see what you like, what you don't like. And that counts for anything, right? What we've been doing for the last year is producing online shows. So what we need to do is to watch online shows. You need to see what's out there. You need to get a sense of what other people are doing, so that you can either determine what you like, what you don't like, or figure out what you want to make your own, just to have inspiration. So that, whether it's writing advice or any job, it works with houses. If you're looking at, doing some work around the house, doing some projects, I know my in-laws drive around the neighborhoods looking at what people have done with shutters and additions and whatnot. And now that we own our own home, we do a little of that ourselves. But that's how you learn. That's how you get inspiration. So these are all great comments. What I'd like to do now, Tina, is turn our attention. It's 9:20 or so. I'd like to turn our attention to the old Gray Lady, not so gray anymore, the New York Times, and take a look at what's in the paper, dig in a little bit with the various sections. We'll start with the front page, and then after that, we'll ask you which section you want to go to first, and take it from there. So let's go ahead and switch to the New York Times cam. We talked about the front page earlier for each of the sections. Let's take a look at the front section. One of the things I always find interesting is that when the front page goes more than 20 pages, right, they have to have a little insert to get the extra pages. And for me, when I'm looking at the paper, that actually serves to highlight that page 21, even if it's inadvertent. Oftentimes it's an obit, sometimes it's a feature story. This time when you flip up that first section, it's the jump of the Delta variant story and the shortage of nurses, which is really interesting. So let's take a look at what's inside the paper. The Times Insider piece, a rush of news moment by moment. This is in live coverage. Teams of journalists collaborate to tell a single unfolding story. This is really interesting. This is looking at the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, but it also takes a look at other live pieces. Here it says the Times has outgrown its role as a New York-centric print newspaper. Mark Lacey, assistant managing editor, released. The Live team said it is now a global digital news organization that produces podcasts, videos, and newsletters along with a newspaper. The Live team is just the latest step in its evolution. A few weeks ago, we actually had Shashank Bengali, who is an editor on the Live team, join us on the show. He's based in Singapore. He'll be moving to London. He told us about the 3 news hubs, London, New York, and Singapore, that hand off to one another throughout the day, so that you do have continuous coverage. And we looked at the live coverage, particularly of coronavirus, and I was looking at the live coverage of Hurricane Henry before we started the show. Times Insider is definitely my favorite column for news geeks or anyone who's interested in the New York Times. A lot of great insights from there. Did you ever have any stories covered in the Insider, or did you ever write for the Insider column?
I don't think it was invented when I left in 2009. But I did work the night rewrite shift for a couple years voluntarily when my daughter was a baby. And I remember sort of being the last writer out of the building very often when they would blow the whistle at 2 a.m. And we didn't really hand off to other countries at that point.
And Carla, I know, worked on the continuous news desk when she was there as well.
Yes.
The headline in history, Marcos foe slain as he goes home from exile in the U.S. This is 1983. Benigno Aquino Jr., the strongest political rival of President Ferdinand Marcos, was killed with a single shot as he stepped off a plane in Manila. That I remember when that was news. That's incredible. And Carla is making a reference to what you just said. They literally blew a whistle at the end of the night. I guess they really had to make you go home at that point.
It was a wooden train whistle. It sounded like a steam engine.
Wow. That's great. On page 3, what they do is they cover of interest, noteworthy facts from today's paper. So this is almost like your guide to the paper to kind of draw you in. They look at different pieces, the Idealist Music Collective, 37D03D, created by Aaron Dessner and Justin Brennan, reads upside down as people. This is in the arts and leisure section. I do not know what they're referencing there in that piece. At the time of his death in 2011, Osama bin Laden had wives who ranged in age from 28 to 62 and children from 3 to 35. This is from the book review, The Terrorist Who Changed Everything. Female fruit flies, which become sexually active 8 to 10 hours after they hatch, can lay up to 100 eggs a day. Here it's an interesting piece in Sunday Styles. In 2014, a rocket launched from Wallops Island, Virginia, flew for 6 seconds before it fell to the ground and exploded. This was, 7 years ago, burning 15 acres and blowing windows and doors off buildings over a mile away. This was in reference to the article about Georgia. Will rockets disrupt Georgia's quiet skies? I actually was at Chincoteague in Virginia, near Wallops Island, last week on vacation. So today's Sunday. I guess we've been home now. So it was the week before that. We watched a rocket launch, the Antares rocket launch from Wallops Island. That was pretty amazing. Here's a little sketchbook, Departure. This is invoking Afghanistan. And then Here to Help, storing your digital vaccination record on Android phones, on iPhones, etc. You can easily just take a picture and keep that accessible. Here's the international section. As folks will note, there used to be a Tracking the Outbreak section in the front of the paper. They stopped doing that. I wonder if they will have to go back to that. That'll be an interesting bellwether if the New York Times goes back to tracking the outbreak. This is an article about chief heat officer in Greece. They're talking about naming heat waves like we do name storms to draw more attention to them and get people thinking about the impact of climate change. Here is the collapse of Afghanistan. America's Afghan War, drawing down an unwinnable conflict. A new wave of refugees faces much chillier U.S. welcome. Taliban promised to protect country's cultural heritage, but fears persist. I think given their track record, those fears are very well founded. U.S. Embassy warns Americans to avoid Kabul airport among threats. Stranded Afghans describe terror as hopes of escaping the Taliban fade. And then take a step back, look at the full page, 2-page spread. Miscue after miscue. This is a jump from the front page. U.S. exit plan unravels. So nice dominant photo there. Picture of President Biden with some aides, and then President Biden meeting with former Afghan President Ashraf Ghani, General Mark Milley, etc. But it definitely gets your attention the way they laid that out. The struggle to preserve a Moroccan house of music and its legacy. Vietnam War victims say South Korea still owes them answers. Inquiry in Haiti links guard to drug trade. And global needs and past misuse of donations threaten Haiti's recovery. Very good international coverage. And then here we get to the national section. Black Caucus grows more powerful, diverse, and complicated, which is not surprising. As any group grows, you're going to see more diversity, more fragmentation in thought. It will be harder to keep that kind of unity. And then here's a continuation of that story on Time's Up and Cuomo. And for voting protections, maybe Democrats versus the Roberts Court. That doesn't look good. So then here's the continuation of that front page. Here's a story about Long Island and New England prepare for rare landfall by hurricane. Now this I thought was very interesting. And granted, this is the national edition. So, the Washington edition, rather, not national. It would have been put together earlier in the day. There are only 2 dots, if you can see that, right under right before the issue number. So it was relatively early yesterday when they put that together, but no reference of Hurricane Henry on the front page. And even on the front page of the New York section. Say it again?
It's on page 22 in my version.
Yeah, and so not on the front page in the New York edition, which I was surprised by. And it's here on page 22 in the national edition as well, the DC edition. So this is that Long Island, New England. Is it the same coverage? Is it the same article, or are there more details in your edition?
I think it's the same. Oh, you guys know. We don't have a picture. Let's see.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And that's the entire coverage of Hurricane Henry that you have?
Well, I haven't read, as far as I know, yeah.
From what you can tell, sure. Interesting. They do have an article about the concert in Central Park that was halted because of lightning. I think it was the middle of Barry Manilow's set.
They cut his mic.
That's incredible. You were going to watch that on your DVR, right? How was it?
I did. We got up to LL Cool J on the DVR, and it was an amazing concert. It was beautiful. I had friends from the Times who were there, and I was watching them on Facebook as they sought shelter and headed home and felt sad. Shout out to Cheryl Levin Brown, trying to see Bruce Springsteen. And we had hoped to have a neighborhood party with a friend who has a screen, but for a lot of reasons it didn't work. And I'm glad, because by the time it was dark enough, it was absolutely downpouring here.
I heard the rains, and there's flooding in New Jersey as well. So it certainly is challenging. As we continue, we hit the obits. Tom T. Hall, 85, who was known as country music storyteller, dies. Gino Strada, 73, surgeon who brought medicine to the front lines of war. His medical charity has treated more than 11 million people in 19 countries since 1994. And then Janice Mirkatani, 80, poet and activist who helped people in need, is dead. The caption here, Janice Mirkatani, is in an undated photo with some of the children helped by the nonprofit San Francisco organization Glide, of which she was the founding president. At right, there she is in 2010. And of course, whenever we look at the obits, we always want to remind people that Missugram is a great app to use if you want to honor someone's memory, if you want to remember them. You can find Missugram on iOS and Android. That's Missugram. You can find it on iOS and Android. Do you read the obits, Tina? What's your thought on that?
I'm writing down Missugram. Hold on. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do read the obits. I recently watched the movie on obits at the New York Times.
Yes.
I always check to see if people died of COVID lately, to keep track of what we're losing in this whole pandemic. And I check the obits in my hometown paper too, so I'm a little bit morbid that way, but I find them beautifully written and you always learn something.
We are big fans of the obits here. We've had several New York Times writers, Neil Genslinger, Amy Padani, Margaret Fox, as well, who've been on the show and we've talked about obits. Have you written any advanced obits for the Times?
I have. Don't ask me whose though.
I don't think you're allowed to tell us, right?
Oh, good.
Are you?
I don't know, but it's not a worry because I don't remember. I did do a lot of the portraits of grief right after
9/11.
9/11, and that was probably the most meaningful work I did at the paper for me personally. In that, at that point, I came back from maternity leave in December, and by then people wanted their person written about, so it wasn't calling people who were in the depths of immediate grief. And that was some of the most poetic images that people just spoke out loud. Some of the most meaningful descriptions. It was such a challenge when there were so many firefighters and Cantor Fitzgerald people. The need to make each one stand out was so great from the writer's perspective, that it required talking to a lot of folks to make sure that each individual came out as most themselves and most unique as possible.
That was an incredible time. And of course, last year with COVID, there was a similar project. Those We've Lost, I think is what they call it. Portraits of people who lost their lives to COVID, which is incredible. Thank you for sharing that. That's the front page section. Where would you like to go next? What do you do? What section do you read first?
I go straight to the book review and the magazine.
Let's go straight to the book review and the magazine. So this first, I mentioned that first story is about is Under the Sea, about 2 books about underwater exploration. As we flip through, if there are books that you're familiar with, please let us know. There's an interview with William Kent Kruger, mystery writer whose latest Court O'Connor book is A Lightning Strike. Still love Sherlock Holmes? Is there a more mysterious and nefarious villain than Moriarty? There's a piece, The Trouble with Murderinos.
What I went to was the drop, how the most addictive sport can help us understand addiction and recovery. I went straight to that because I really was curious as to what the most addictive sport is.
The most addictive sport?
It turns out to be surfing.
Here is, that's it, Low Tide. What can surfing tell us about addiction? And that's interesting. We had Diane Caldwell on last year,
Yes.
She wrote a book on the Rockaways, and it just got picked up by Kerry Washington to be produced, I believe, as a movie. But so surfing is the most addictive sport. Tell us more. What did you take
Well,
from this?
I was thinking it might. I mean, I was thinking it might be golf because golf is so aggravating, and people just stay trying to do it over and over again. Um, I thought there was some addictiveness in the golf world in that you can have a brilliant shot and then just completely stink the next day, but it keeps you going back for more.
And
I
there's an interesting pull quote for surfers. Uh, there is the thrill of being gathered up and borne along as if by magic.
Yep.
I am not a golfer, but I would be surprised if any golfer uses magic to describe their experience on the links.
Safe to say.
What can surfing tell us about addiction? That's interesting. This is a book by Tad Ziolkowski. What else got your attention?
Well, I always read the Ethicist in
The Ethicist in the magazine.
Yeah, that's the first place I usually go in when I'm reading the magazine.
Let's
And
follow your lead. Let's go to the Ethicist in the magazine. We also like the Ethicist column here on the New York Times Read Along. We'll often read the piece by Kwame Anthony Appiah. I believe, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But so one thing we didn't talk about, Tina, is that we actually ask our guests that first question or one of the questions that comes up. So let's take a look. This first one, is my art therapy guilty of cultural appropriation? So this is going to take a little thinking. I work as an art therapist at a hospital where I invited a group of patients to participate in an exercise based on practices of several indigenous American cultures. I led participants on a guided mindfulness journey to find their spirit animals. Afterward, we discussed the meanings of their animals, and patients drew pictures of them, and I put them on a totem pole. We discussed the internal individual experience and the group experience. The patients seemed to get a lot out of this session, but I am a white male, and one patient questioned whether it was appropriate for me to do this exercise. She claimed that it was an example of cultural appropriation. Is she right?
I thought that was a very interesting question. I think the way that the art therapist can deal with that going forward is to ask his clients and present it with his own words about why this exercise, though not of his culture, is valuable to him and helped him or other patients gain insights. And if you introduce it as an homage and also work from other cultures, then you can get away from the cringe factor. But when I first read that question, the cringe factor was definitely there.
I would agree. I kept waiting to see the identity of the person running that workshop and what they said.
Yeah. But
Going back to the
ethicist went easier on him than I would have necessarily.
So you read ahead. What did the ethicist say?
He said that spirit animals, or not by that name, but that animals were important in the identities of cultures all over the world, and that he gave a really useful background to. He took the lens out, a couple f-stops, and made it be more universal, and he was not judgy about it. I liked his answer.
Interesting. I do want to point out that going back to the conversation about portraits of grief, our friend Naomi Sturvis said that Portraits of Grief was not only great journalism, it was a visceral way to humanize the victims. And so I want to thank you for your work on that. Certainly left a impression all these years later. And then also in the magazine, let's say one interesting article. I don't know if you are a baseball fan, but they have a whole article about a cat, cat tail. So if you happen to know, a cat jumped on the field at in April onto Coors Field during a Dodgers Rocky game, and more recently at a Yankees game. And they did what cats do. And there's a famous blooper reel of a cat running around in Seattle where one of the groundskeepers tried to pick him up and it scratched or bit him. And you see the groundskeeper jumping around. We used to have a cat. I can empathize with what was going on. But a whole article about the cat. The cat is an incredible athlete. Watching it is like watching an Olympic event. Among the other animals to have complicated Major League Baseball games, squirrels, including a 2011 good luck charm named Rally Squirrel. So you never know what you're going to get when you flip through. We have the poem, the New York Times Magazine poem. And so we're going to start with this one, and then we're going to turn to your poem. Sri feels really strongly that poems should be read by the author. So that's why we're thrilled that you'll be reading one of your own, because the author is the one that really understands how the poem should be read, what the where the emphasis should be, etc. It should never be read cold. It should never be read without context. Yet we do it on a regular basis on the New York Times read along.
Well, I disagree. I think that anytime someone reads my poems out loud, I learn something from the reading. In our poetry workshop, the poet reads it, and then another person reads it, and you gain some insights from what words need fixing, what you might have said that you didn't even intend to say, but that comes through in reading. So I learn a lot when other people read my poems, and I'm honored to read this one. I really like this one.
Okay.
So I have it on my screen here, so I'll read it.
Go ahead. Please.
It's called Medical History by Nicole Seeley. I've been pregnant. I've had sex with a man who's had sex with men. I can't sleep. My mother's mother had asthma. My father had a stroke. My father's mother has high blood pressure. Both grandfathers died from diabetes. I drink. I don't smoke. Xanax for flying. Propranolol for anxiety. My eyes are bad. I'm spooked by the wind. Cousin Lily died from an aneurysm. Aunt Hilda, a heart attack. Uncle Ken, wise as he was hit by a car, as if to disprove whatever theory toward which I write. And I understand. The stars in the sky are already dead.
Wow. This poem is by Nicole Seeley, and it was selected by Dwayne Betts. Dwayne Betts is a poet and lawyer. He created Freedom Reads, an initiative to curate micro-libraries and install them in prisons across the country. His 2018 article in the New York Times Magazine about his journey from teenage carjacker to working lawyer won a National Magazine Award. And I always like reading the background on the poem. So what he wrote is, I've always believed that the poet writing in the first person is the best fabulist. That most peculiar of words, that means both composer of fables and an inventory of elaborate lies. Nicole Seeley's Medical History is one of those poems that turn a list into something more, a moral of the awe and desperation of the world. The North Star and all the rest might be long dead, just as the details of our lives might just be the past, and yet sometimes the past leads us to freedom, and there is beauty in the remembering and noticing of it all. Very interesting. So speaking of poetry, I'd like to ask you to take the stage. We have one of your poems from Rise Wildly that we'd like you to read. And I'm going to put that on the screen, unless you have it with you. I have it on screen on cards for you.
Oh, please show that.
Sure, and then you can read it for our audience. This is, again, as a reminder, this is from Tina's book, Rise Wildly, the book of her most recent book of poetry, and we will go to this poem, and it's in two pieces. So again, we'll pause just for a moment after the first card.
Trains running after storms. And that was a headline in the New York Times, July 20th, 1997. And again, this is my fantasy about what would happen if trains really chased after storms. I had to commit flight. I had seen too many birds escaping, flying off to the sides as if I were evil. In the east, the rumbling called to me, kept ahead of me, vanished. I rose and laughed. Be confident, the other trains told me. Rise wildly. I saw a star that appeared for only a second, then another star, then another. Short, fast stars, all far more complex than we had imagined. The sky, the flat land, the fields. There is more so of everything, like daybreak in a house you knew first at night. In one car, everyone had the same name, all the Yolanda Schmidts on the planet at once. I saw meteors all day behind the sunlight. Yolanda, age 9, wanted to know what never mind really means. The fields near Spokane looked like lily pads, green circles of irrigation systems. The last train followed the last engine, like the flung back droop of Columbine spurs, triumphant. We were magnificent. We're in the castle of the angels, the 5-year-old Yolanda hollered. You know the look of the small plane flying beneath the big plane, that sliding lack of control. Perhaps this is a forever nightstand, the 37-year-old Yolanda thought, pondering what had happened very early this morning. Have you ever seen a bee land on a bud and both fall fast to the ground? When we land, there's a tunnel in the moon.
Thank you, Tina, for that reading. What I'd like to do is make a few announcements, thank our staff, etc., and then ask you to come back on the screen to offer some final thoughts before we close the show. I want to, again, thank everyone for joining us and do a special shout out to our production team, Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, Carla Baranauckas. You can follow them on Twitter at Big Green Pen, at Steve DeReeve, at Julia L. Weeks, and at Kabara. Again, my name is Neil Parekh. I'm the executive producer of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along and occasional guest host. We are live every Sunday, almost every Sunday, at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I say almost because we won't be live next week, but we will be returning September 5th with Sarah Maslin-Nier. I apologize, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but she is a New York Times Metro reporter and the author of a new book on horses. So we're looking forward to having her join us. We really appreciate her taking the time. Labor Day weekend. So please, we're taking the week before Labor Day off, but Labor Day weekend, we will have a show with Sarah Maslin-Nier. And again, as I mentioned at the top of the show, she's on call. We'll be live at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. You can follow them at She's on Call. It's a great episode, back to school year 2 in coronavirus. Definitely something we need to pay attention to and learn from. We actually had Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar and Dr. Marina Kurian as recurring guests on our show at the beginning of coronavirus, and then we worked with them to spin off and have their own show produced by our colleagues Rose Horowitz, Julia Weeks, and Vandana Menon. Sri serves as the executive producer along with the two doctors of that show. So please join She's on Call at 11 a.m. Eastern Time shortly after this show is over. And then again, as a reminder, I want to make sure you know about our firm Digimentors. We do social and digital consulting. We produce conferences, webinars, talk shows. We can do trainings and workshops, whether it's a virtual event, a hybrid event, whatever you are planning. Don't cancel your event. Please give us a call. Let's see how we can work together to do something great this year. It's a very, we almost wish you didn't need us, but it looks like our services will be needed as we go forward. So please feel free to email us. You can reach Sri. His email address is sri@digimentors.group, sri@digimentors.group. You can also reach me at neil@digimentors.group, neil@digimentors.group. And so with that, I want to bring back Tina and ask her for some final thoughts as we close out the show. We talked about Breaking Barriers, your book on PTech. We talked about Almost Home, your book about teen homelessness, your poetry. What would you like to leave our viewers with, Tina?
Oh, I'd like to add that Almost Home was written with Kevin Ryan, who's the executive director of Covenant House, which is the largest charity working with homeless young people in the hemisphere. And he was an inspiration as well with his work and what he's done to grow Covenant House to serve more young people. I'd like to urge everyone to mask up and get vaccinated and get your friends vaccinated. Stay safe, be hopeful, and tune in 2 weeks from now.
Thank you very much, Tina. I appreciate that. A few notes that came in. Patricia said your poetry sounds like a melody of words. Beautiful. And I couldn't agree more. And she said, thank you to our production team for the show. Jonathan Borstein, great show. Enjoy the break. Patricia saying next week is like a snow day. Although with virtual school, I was breaking the news to my daughter. I don't think that we're going to be having snow days going forward. It'll be too easy to just switch to virtual school if they need to. Laura saying year 2, ugh, which I agree. And Naomi wanted to share a great movie, Coda, about the child of deaf adults. So we'll take a look at that, certainly. And Liz Pressman says, thank you, Neil and crew, and thank you to Tina. Liz is a friend of yours.
Yes, she was the library guru when I was at Night Rewrite, and she's awesome, and I'm glad to see her.
She's watched several of our shows, and she shared. We talked about archival research. It might have been when Margalit was on the show. I can't remember. Margalit Fox, also, longtime obituary writer for the Times. But Liz, thank you for joining us as always. Patricia appreciates your work on Almost Home. Michael Finelli stayed with us the whole show. Michael, thank you so much for joining the New York Times Read Along. Great show. And thank you to Tina for raising awareness about the PTech model. Absolutely. We certainly want to thank her for that. And of course, to remind people.
Thank him for all the work he's doing, just getting it day to day to work.
Absolutely. And that's Michael, almost left of center in the picture, the ribbon cutting for the first day at the New Brunswick PTech school.
He's behind Dr. Johnson, who's next to Governor Murphy right there. So.
And Dr. Johnson, and Dr. Johnson was watching on Twitter as well earlier. And I was going to remind people of the book, Breaking Barriers, how PTech schools create a pathway from high school to college to career. And then Ellen says, great show. Liz clarified your relationship. You were, in fact, desk mates which I think it elevates that
Yes.
how close you two were. So thank you very much for joining us, Tina. Please find. I can't leave without my mom saying great show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mom. Appreciate it. We certainly want to remind people that Tina is an author and poet, former Metro reporter for the New York Times. You can follow her on Twitter at Tina Kelley. So please take a moment to do that. And again, thank you for joining us. Naomi reminds me to always call your mom. I say hi to my mom every week. Naomi, every week I say hi to her. I do talk to her more often than that. But with that, thank you for joining us. Again, we'll be off next week. We might do a special pre-recorded show like I did a few weeks ago when I was on vacation. I actually woke up at 5:30 in the morning and pre-recorded a quick 15-minute show because next week is New York Times for Kids, a special print-only special section, and I can't stay away from that. I love the New York Times for Kids, so we might be taking a look at that. We'll see what we can do. But again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Bye, everyone.